Welcome, Christiana. I'm so delighted to have you here to help us crack the secrets of AI for content. We are doing an introductory series on generative AI, and last month we spent a number of hours with our AI guru and kind of looked at it from the top level. But I'm interested in your thoughts on AI and the creator economy, more specifically your article, how generative AI will affect the creator economy, with the app subtitle, ChatGPT did not write this article, but it maybe wrote that Instagram caption. So before we do that, though, tell our audience about your background. Tell us, you've been a reporter for Newsweek, Vice, an editor at MTV News and NPR. Now you are a senior culture reporter at Mashable. You're covering, I'm assuming, Facebook, Instagram, and now also is Threads in that remit?
Yeah, everything Meta owned. It's great to be here. So I started off my journalism career at NPR. I worked as a digital news assistant where I wrote a little bit, but mostly I tweeted, which NPR now no longer does. But after NPR, I went over to Newsweek, where I covered LGBTQ issues and human rights violations. And then I hopped to both Vice News and Teen Vogue. Vice, I covered mostly school shootings. I was there during Parkland. And at Teen Vogue, I covered politics. And then I did some magazine editing before being hired at MTV News to help head their politics vertical. I left there once COVID hit and went back to NPR, where I did editing for about 2 years. And now I'm at Mashable, where I'm a senior reporter. I was hired to cover then Facebook, which is now Meta. And at the time, it was mostly Facebook and Instagram. And the communities there, the politics involved. It has been a very busy few years with whistleblowers and sort of the intersection of how Mark Zuckerberg is affecting our democracy. And now, this past week, Threads. But over the past 6 months, a lot of the creators and the communities on those platforms have been using AI or have been encouraged to sort of play with AI, or have been seeing the way that AI has been changing the content that they make or they consume. So that's also been sort of a big part of my beat over the past, since, I guess, November 2022.
Well, that's I think November 30th, 2022 is sort of when everything changed. It was like up until that point, I felt like I was, as I like to say, I was AI sentient. No, I was AI aware.
Right.
But I was not quite AI sentient. I knew what was going on in the space. So tell us about that moment. Like, what happened? What changed? Like, it feels like that's a watershed moment.
Yeah, I think AI was always a big part of the science community. So our science reporters were covering AI and the way that scientists were using it, right? But it wasn't something that I was covering. And if I was covering it, it is how was AI being used by the platforms to get you to click on a link, to get you to click on an ad, to get you to buy something, to get you to stay on. How was AI being used by these algorithms? But those things are so much further apart from the creators and the consumers themselves in our brains than how AI is now. So when November hit, at first the biggest thing was ChatGPT, and still as a writer, that's the tool that is used the most. We also have visual tools like Midjourney, and I'm seeing creators use it in a few different ways. So I sort of see AI and the creator economy in 4 different buckets. And one bucket are the creators who don't use it at all. I mean, it's important to remember that the vast majority of content creators are not full-time influencers. They're not full-time creators. Content creation does not pay that much for the average content creator. So if you are only creating content occasionally and you're only able to do it outside of your 9 to 5, you might not have the time to explore these tools and to see how useful they are. There's a learning curve. The second kind of creators are the creators who use them for ideation. And this is pretty common, right? It's like asking ChatGPT, what are some ideas that I can use for a video? How can I talk about this from a different angle? What kind of people should I be talking to about this, right? ChatGPT is helpful with that. And Midjourney too at some point is it's a really great tool for people who are afraid of the blank page. The third kind are people who are using this to make their content. So it's maybe people who are taking a longer YouTube video and are using an AI editing tool to shorten it, or who are saying, putting their whole script into ChatGPT and asking for an Instagram caption, asking for a tweet. And then there are AI influencers, right? So that is an influencer that is made of AI that we know is AI. And those are fairly new, but weren't launched in like November 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Let's start with the Philistines or the non-adopters. That's probably not our purview, but AI for idea generation. You know, you talk about these three influencers in your article. They're sort of put in a room, a virtual room or a WhatsApp thread, you know, by a CEO of a talent agency. I'm assuming it was like, we're going to get huge ratings if we put these three folks together. They have no idea. They have no idea what to do next. So then one of them actually just kind of threads in the three separate voices and says what would be a good thing. And it not only provides an idea that the three influencers all love, but also the CEO, and it's an effective idea. You know, so okay, I mean that to me is basically you're getting maybe bullet points. I'm thinking of this maybe for you as a journalist, maybe you're trying to figure out, how do I frame up this article? Do you use it in that way as a journalist yourself? And how is that different than, okay, these three guys, go to a bungalow in Hollywood and just have to like hash it out over a couple of bolts of scotch or whatever it is?
Yeah, I don't use it that much. I do. Okay, I use ChatGPT for it's a brilliant thesaurus. So you can put a phrase in there and be like, how do I say this differently? And it'll give you like 5 to 10 different ways to say it differently. So I've stopped using thesaurus.com as much. But really for content ideation, it's just not that helpful from a journalist perspective because the information that ChatGPT is dealing with is old. So I can't say, what are some story ideas about threads? Because threads doesn't exist in ChatGPT's brain. So in order to get good ideas from ChatGPT, you have to put a lot of effort into the prompts. And at that point, I might as well just put a lot of effort into content, into ideating myself or ideating with my colleagues. But for a marketer or a content creator marketer, right? So you mentioned there are these 3 creators, they're all going to be in London, and their marketer who works with all 3 of these creators was like, I need them to do a video together. They don't know what to do. So he put in all this information about the 3 of them and said, give me 20 ideas. And probably 16 of them were useless. They were super silly and they didn't make sense and they didn't really work for these creators. But the other 6 were really great. And so you give these 6 ideas to these creators. And it's important to keep in mind that these creators are good at what they do. They're good at being entertaining and interesting. So when you give them these ideas, they bounce off of that and they create ideas that they know will work best with their audiences and things that they're good at, that they're funny while doing or that they look good while doing, right? So I think that the tool is really helpful for that content ideation. And that content ideation is also, if you're a YouTuber who puts out a video a week, there's going to be weeks where you just don't have ideas. And it's like, okay, do I just do another vlog? Do I do another Q&A? And ChatGPT is really good for a starting point there. But right. That's about.
Yeah, well, I actually, it's interesting that you made that point that ChatGPT doesn't really help with news too much because it's all so, fleeting. I did this early version. We were doing a podcast, and this is the early days of my experience with ChatGPT, and I'm researching this Fiskars, which is this one of the oldest companies in the world. It's from it got original like smelting from the Queen of Finland right before the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. It was like the right time, right place, etc. But now they make those orange-handled scissors that you know so well, and they also own a number of different brands. They've been around for a long time. But anyway, I'm like preparing this stuff, and I said, "Is there anybody after the founder who could be an interesting, profile for this thing?" I spent like a good chunk of the afternoon before I finally went, "Should I fact check this?" And I went back and discovered that yes, it was all entirely made up. So I guess that's where the line is drawn. Like where the bullshit factor, like in Madison Avenue, like, hey, that's fine. Like we just need snappy ideas, and for the influencer industry and for other areas where being authentic and being accurate is not as important. So I do see where that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna add on to that and say that there are other ways that I know some journalists use this. I have a friend. I was chatting about ChatGPT with them a couple days ago, and they said that when they're done with a story, like a long feature that they've worked really hard on, they'll put the whole piece into ChatGPT and say, "Give me 5 bullet points that describe this story," to make sure that they're not just so caught up in the weeds that they're missing what the big takeaways that an average reader will take from their piece. So I think there are other ways to use this beyond content ideation, but really, for journalists, it's just not particularly helpful.
Well, so I guess I will have to, in that regard, look to you as a reporter who's done an article talking about this with the creators. This guy, trying to remember, Duncan was the CEO, right? He said, here's a quote from him: "If you can give artificial intelligence some level of understanding as to what you're trying to accomplish, the content creators can use it in order to make themselves more effective in what they're trying to do." So, I mean, I'd look at that as you've got to put the right prompts into it,
Absolutely.
And I'm going to head down that road a little bit further. But tell me about that. Tell me about the notion that, there are so many people who go, I just didn't get anything out of it. It's not working for me. What are they doing wrong?
Yeah, I think that you have to give ChatGPT more information than you think you do. And at first, it feels like so much work, right? It's like, why am I spending 30 minutes trying to think of a prompt to get ChatGPT to give me the answer when I could spend that 30 minutes just coming up with the answer myself? And that's true if you're thinking about something with immediate gratification. But if you're planning on using this tool long term, there's a lot to be said about working to be more efficient in the way that you create these prompts so that when you get the response, it's actually helpful. And that's what Duncan does, right? So when he put in he put a lot of information in about these 3 creators. He put information about what their audience is like, what their followers are like, what their engagement's like, how old they are, and how much they interact with their fans, right? So Chloe Veach was one of the three influencers that was meeting up. Chloe is famous for being on Too Hot to Handle and The Circle, which are 2 reality TV shows. These other 2 influencers are slightly younger than her. They're both men, and they're famous for being influencers. So the people who follow her and the way that they interact with their fans is very different, and you have to tell ChatGPT about this. But because he was so aggressive and overdone with how he did this prompt, he got feedback that was helpful. And he gave a tip, or he gives this tip to his influencers that he works with, which is to use it for everything. And that's what I was doing with ChatGPT at first. You use it for recipes. I had ChatGPT make me a workout and fitness plan that I followed for a month and wrote about. You want it to do everything for you so you can figure out what it's good at doing. The prompt is really important, but it's also really important to make sure you're using this tool the way that it's meant to be used.
Right. I'm going to come back to this. I just still want to go through to your next group. You said the folks who are actually using generative AI to make content. And I think you have a researcher, a research scientist, Harvard, MIT, creator for YouTube. She's actually researching AI. I mean, her YouTube channel is about the use of AI in there, and she's talking about using Midjourney because she can't create that kind of art. And I guess, I don't know, Felix, if you could, no, I don't want to screw up, but this is all AI generated from Midjourney. Sorry.
Yeah.
You can see my newsroom. These two guys have been pretty static for the last, they're, they're having a very quiet, meditative,
Mhm.
yeah, there I go. But the idea is, I have, I'm not a super, strong graphic designer. I've been a creative director, but my own chops in Photoshop are somewhat limited. But it's good enough where I can stick the Z on. You can't see the Z on this thing, but I do feel like there is, oh, there it is. Yeah, there's the Z in the background. It was literally just put a gradient on a Z and find a good place to put it on top of this thing. It wasn't anything particularly special. But I do think that is like those small human interventions with the right prompts. And I spent a good weekend learning how to talk to Midjourney, in addition to picking up my kids at soccer and whatever. But I was just like locked away because I was so fascinated. I kept on going, oh, let me buy another 10 fast hours, and then I'll buy it, and then I just signed up for the subscription. I was like, after a while, I was like, this is just too good. So tell me about other creators like that, the folks who are using this to make specific pieces of types of content.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, you mentioned that you spent a whole weekend learning how to use it. And now I bet using Midjourney is a lot easier for you, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to learn how to do it, but it's sort of like a language type experience, right? Like the verbs. So it makes it easier to use. The kind of creators who are using this, maybe they are, like I said, putting all the text from a YouTube video, the script, into ChatGPT and saying, like, give me 6 different ideas for an Instagram caption. Give me 10 different tweets I can use for this. That's awesome. ChatGPT rules at that. If you're not good at writing a tweet, if you aren't good at writing an Instagram caption, if you aren't particularly great at, graphic design, Midjourney is really helpful. So these tools really fall into places that creators aren't excellent at. There are also tools that can take a long YouTube video and shorten it into TikToks, shorten it into Instagram Reel videos. That's really helpful for creators as well. But what it's not useful for, and Jordan Herod spoke about this to me as well. She's brilliant. But what it's not useful for is creating content wholesale. So another thing to look at when we think about content creators is this is going on in all content right now. You can look at music videos, and there are people who are using AI before they might be using puppeteering or other kinds of work to make it look like a monster is coming out of somewhere. And instead they're using AI now, and they're hiring AI artists. That's very different from using something like Midjourney. Hiring an artist who creates art using AI is very different from hiring an AI system that has found art and uses that to create something. So there's another sort of fear, and I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but there's a bit of a fear, both visually and in text-based AI, generative AI, that you will be unknowingly using someone else's work, which is not what these content creators are looking to do. So there's a sort of tight line to be walking.
Yeah, I think that's really what's going to be grappled with for the next few years is really where, because what we're doing is trying to build a knowledge base in innovation, which with ChatGPT, I would not be anywhere near as aggressive as we are with our plans. were it not for ChatGPT. Because in terms of like building out some big pillars, things like how do you define a value proposition? How do you define, some of this stuff, the 101 material is somewhat universal content. And that's not necessarily something where you kind of feel like, oh, well, I don't maybe I don't need to, I can focus on hiring my 401 staff, the people who can teach the broader seminars and who can do things that they've got, and find ways in which I can take the simpler stuff and use generative AI for that. But where do you draw the line?
Right.
This is also Wiskus from your article. He says auto-tune didn't destroy singing. It only made people with a different kind of creativity more likely to find a good way to express that creativity. So it basically democratized for all the out-of-tune people, right? It gave them the ability to sound like Mariah Carey. Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea?
That's the question. I don't know if I'm the one to answer it. I think it did. I think Dave is right that it did make it easier or different for a lot of the availability to make that kind of music. If you are an incredible guitarist and you live in rural America and have no friends who play music and you want to add some good vocals on it, now you have the ability to do that, right? But that's not, I don't think, the great majority of people who use autotune. I think a lot of autotune is coming from people who are already in showbiz and are bad singers. And so they're getting autotune to help them out. So I think that's a really good question, and I don't think we can answer it yet. I think ChatGPT is too new. I think generative AI in general is too new, the way that users are able to use it. So it's hard to know if this is going to be something that is going to democratize the ability for creators to make content, or if it's just going to make that gap worse.
Well, let's get a little macro now, because you've got obviously experience digital journalism, social impact reporting, and meta. I'm interested to, kind of look at your understanding of AI and business and how this is going to change. And I guess with social media would probably be the first place to start. What is it going to do? How is AI going to influence these platforms? And maybe specifically with probably the biggest issue that's faced them for the last 15 years, which is content moderation. How, what's going to change on all these platforms in the next couple of years?
I don't know if much will. I mean, I think Meta platforms have already been using AI for content moderation, and it's bad. It's not helpful. It ends up, I can't say it's across the board bad, but it is a great majority of it is unhelpful, and it ends up hurting creators of color, women creators. It ends up hurting a lot of creators who are trying to talk about. Here's a great example. They used AI to make it so that you couldn't push eating disorder content. And on the cover, that seems great, right? Like, we don't want eating disorder content on Instagram. It's bad for people. It kills people. This is a public health issue. But when you start using AI to ban words that have anything to do with eating disorders, what you're doing is you're also stopping the ability of young people to get help online, to talk about their eating disorders, to talk about what can I do next? How can I stop this? What are some tools that I can get, especially young people who might not be in a place of comfort to talk to an adult about that, but do have the ability to go online and figure that out, right? So using AI for content moderation is not an easy solution. It is not the solution that we think it will be, because language is much more nuanced than AI right now has the ability to pick through. I will say that they're using AI for ads. They've been using AI for ads, but Facebook recently launched, I want to say this was about a month and a half ago, they launched the ability for creators to use AI while making ads. And I can see that as being sort of like a great way for some of these creators, instead of these small business owners from having to be incredible photographers and having to have studios to shoot their products. They can expand an image or make their image look like it's in front of a gradient or whatever right within the Facebook app. So when they decide to start posting and selling from Facebook and from Instagram, it's a lot easier to do, and their product looks a lot prettier and it looks a lot better. So I think that there are ways that these platforms are going to use it. I don't think that AI is the solution to content moderation.
Well, let me ask you this. I probably am going to cut out of it, but I have to ask you this. So I would be journalistically deficient. Like, tell me about Threads. Like, is this going to? I mean, we're both journalists. I'm assuming that Twitter was at one point like your go-to social platform, or
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Instagram obviously is your beat, but you're a journalist, so you know it's your lifeblood. And then suddenly, like, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It was faster than it took ChatGPT to get to it, like whatever 100 million users. Did Elon like basically cook his own goose?
Yes, Elon cooked his own goose. We have Matt Binder at Mashable is a phenomenal Twitter reporter who would be able to answer this question so much better than me. Elon kicked him off of Twitter when he was kicking off journalists, forced him to get a verified check mark once he removed all the others. So Matt is really involved in this whole thing. I have been on Threads. I'm using it. I think that number, that how many users are on Threads right now, and us thinking like, whoa, that's more users than we could ever have imagined. It's easier to get a Threads account than it was to get a Mastodon, a Blue Sky, a Twitter, anything else. You opened your Instagram app and it was like, do you want to also send tweets from here? Just click yes. And then you have the account. It's right there. You follow all the people you already follow on Instagram. You are followed by the people who follow, right? It's just such an easy switch. How many people are actually going to stay and are actually going to use it, I think is going to be different. People who are good at Instagram are not good at Twitter. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a Venn diagram and there are people who live in the middle, and I envy them so much. But the vast majority of people who are funny or interesting on Twitter, excuse me, are not going to be on Instagram. And sort of it's vice versa as well. And so I think what you have on Twitter is this really great user base that isn't matched on Threads yet. So Elon is absolutely destroying this platform, which sucks because I loved it. I loved my experience on Twitter. I got every single one of my jobs from Twitter interactions with people. I got a lot of story ideas from Twitter. I follow a lot of my favorite writers and journalists on Twitter. It's a much easier way to read some of their work and to know that they were producing it than it is to subscribe to 400 platforms and publications. But I don't really see Threads right now, as it exists now, as being a replacement for Twitter. And there are a couple reasons for that. Right now, it doesn't have what Twitter has. There's no DM option. There's no follower feed. I mean, Alan Mosseri has said himself that he's not interested in it being a news platform. So the incentive to join Threads is very different from the incentive to join Twitter for me. My incentive on Twitter is to interact with fellow journalists, to catch up on their work, to follow breaking news events, to read shitposts. The only reason I'm on Threads is because I'm an Instagram reporter. That's it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the toxicity to me was like, I mean, I don't follow the news as closely as I maybe as you need to day to day. But like it was amazing to me that within the span of 6-7 months, just like these small, minute changes in content moderation. It's just I think it is absolutely like the topic still has yet to be solved. Nobody's really cracked like the social graph. Facebook crushed it, right? I guess the picture graph, you could say, or the image, Instagram got that. But the interest graph, like news and interests, where it's up to interpretation, where you have the bias problem, right? It's the same thing that, like, do you read the New York Times or do you read the Wall Street Journal? That seems to be the challenge I think both Threads and Twitter are going to have for time immemorial. And I don't know if that's anything that AI could end up doing, but do anything about.
I don't think so either. There's also, and this is something that I've reported on, and I'm sure it's something that you experience. I mean, you correct me if you don't, but I am getting platform fatigue. People are getting platform fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
We know Twitter's dying, so we're like, I need to be on the new Twitter now. So we're downloading Spill and Mastodon and Blue Sky and Threads. And then it's like, okay, do I post the same thing on all of these platforms? Do I follow the same people? Right? At some point, it's just like, I don't care anymore. I'm not downloading another app. I'm just going to not be as online.
That is a very courageous decision to make because, like I was listening to another journalist who was just like, I'm going to go wherever the audience, is. And that's because this is how I, create. And I'm like, I've encountered this because I was never a super social person on my own. I was, I tweeted every now and again myself, but I mostly was, a consumer. And then when we launched Princeton Kaizen, I was like, okay, well, you have to figure out Instagram, you have to figure out YouTube, you have to figure out, and I had to come up with and we now have these big sort of high def 16:9, videos that we're producing. But when we were first looking at Opus, it would break it into the story format for Instagram or for TikTok, and it would find the right cuts, and I looked at it as a former producer as this is one of the best clips markers, first draft of but I was like, I can't use this actual clip that it created, but I could go back and, have an editor do that because that just took away about an hour of my time to go through and mark the clips.
That's exactly it, right? Opus is not going to replace editors, but it's going to make editors' jobs a lot easier. So you're going to have editors who use tools like Opus, and you're going to have editors who refuse to, and they both might end up creating the same thing, but it's going to take the editor using AI less time.
Exactly. And I will say this, I have this conversation with my partner, Ari, who he swears by Opus, and the output is just all you need, man, and just kind of keep on moving it. And he just moves the chains a lot faster than I do. And I'm like, all right, you're going to be responsible for TikTok and Instagram. I'm going to focus on YouTube and LinkedIn, where I kind of need a little bit of more of the 16:9 aspect ratio stuff. Well, that is AI and the creator economy. What about AI and journalism? Obviously, content moderation in that realm takes place with the editorial department, right? So you don't have to worry about it there. But talk about it in terms of story gathering. I mean, ChatGPT is a bullshit artist, so you can't really count on it for, actually giving you historical content. But it's probably not that far away where you can actually start to get stuff that's sort of plugged into an encyclopedia or something. But what about audience engagement, story selection? What are the ways in which AI is going to shape journalism?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky question because we've seen this with, I think IO9 did it and a couple other publications have published articles written by AI, written by ChatGPT that editors then go in post-publish and edit and review. And from what I've seen, every single publication that has done that has had to write a public apology being, we weren't clear enough about this. And also it was wrong. It was factually incorrect a lot of times. So I think we're all still learning how to use it in that way. And I think it's the same answer as it was with content creators, where it cannot create this content wholesale. But I think that you're right, that there probably are some really interesting ways for journalists to use it to either simplify their work, maybe make it more SEO friendly, so that it can be found easier. To use it to a lot of pieces you'll see always have those headers, subheaders within long pieces. The pieces that we were discussing had those, and I'm sure ChatGPT would be helpful in creating those and creating headlines. I haven't used it a ton, and if I'm being honest, it's not because I don't think it's useful. I play around with it all the time, but it's because there's this, what we're comfortable with now, we may not be comfortable with in a few months. And what we were comfortable with a few months ago, we may not be comfortable with now. So because it's moving so quickly, I want to ensure that my work, a lot of my work stands alone months later. And I want to make sure that that can still be trusted by myself and by my audience. But I do know that there are ways that AI is being used to A/B test headlines. It's being used a lot in in sort of the SEO realm. And if we're just talking about AI, it's been around forever. Like if we're not talking about generative AI, like I use Grammarly for like while I'm typing an email, it'll like pop up and ask me if I meant to put an apostrophe there or whatever. That's AI. You know, people have been using different forms, writers have been using different forms of AI for some time now. I don't know if ChatGPT is something that most journalists are comfortable enough with as part of the publishing process, though.
Well, I'm as a publisher, maybe more than a journalist, I would look at it as, could I get a team of reporters, take all the content and say, okay, now now boil it down and create an Axios type of, framework. That's what sort of was going through my mind, is like you could actually like ask it, okay, help me figure out how to build a competitor to Mashable or whatever that may, like what would you create? What would be the type of platform that you would want to do, and how would you? Because it does seem to me like when you've got something on the solve the building blocks, right? That's where it can sometimes be most useful. I think when you're actually doing the journalism, it can help you rewrite it in a certain way. Maybe for me, it takes away some of my weird tics as a writer, and I'm sometimes grateful and sometimes like, maybe leave it in, right? Where do you think, like, put on your publisher's hat? Like, how would it? Jonah Peretti obviously is now using it for the what do you call them? The quizzes that they do on BuzzFeed. Like, where would you incorporate and I do mean generative AI in a journalism organization?
Oh, what a good question. I think SEO testing, I think A/B testing, but I think no matter what way that you use generative AI, I think it's really important that if it is producing anything, if it's producing a headline, a deck, a subhead, before it's published, a human editor needs, or a human writer needs the ability to read through it and overview it. I think even from a publisher's perspective, you're going to get in a dangerous zone if you start having this be back read, which means that after it's published, it's read. And that's because people are going to stop trusting you as much. And that, I think, is the most powerful and important and monetarily valuable factor that a news outlet has, is how much their audience trusts them. And once you lose that trust, it's really hard to gain back.
That is an excellent point. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I probably want to ask you to come back at some point, and so I don't want to get a bad rep as somebody who goes on forever. But I do want you to riff on a couple of the training concepts that we're working on. So as I mentioned, this thing called voice print, and this is from our communications person. She's Ari's longtime collaborator. She put together this series of questions that you ask, a leader, and she works with some fairly well-known CEOs as ghostwriter, communications specialist, et cetera. And she came up with these things, and she sent them to me, and I was like, well, those are the same questions that I ask a brand. When I do the marketing discovery, what are your values? What's your why, how, what, who, why now, why you? What's different? What's the problem you solve? And once you do that, like I don't know if I'm where I'm going with this particular concept, but Amy calls it voice print, and I wonder if you have an opinion on that idea of like being able to like create tone and sensibility, and to train your AI device, which we're calling a personal storytelling assistant sometimes, for people who don't have your capabilities. It can be useful. What do you think of? Can you kind of give this guy the thread of a human voice and a brand distinct voice?
I think you probably can, but we've seen this in actor. They're using actors' voices to do to do things that they're not actually there for. Like these deep fake voices. And I think that you can absolutely have an AI ask those questions, and that'll certainly work. But it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. So if I think what makes journalists, you and I, what makes us interested in doing this work is because we're curious. And that AI doesn't have any of that curiosity. So I might have, like 5 boilerplate questions that I love asking people. And the reason that I love asking that is because I like hearing their answers, and immediately I have like 8 follow-up questions that I just have to ask them. But the first answer is like boring usually, right? What are your values? Everyone has that answer prepared. But the follow-up questions of like why, or how do you implement those values, or what makes that, how does that go into your work and impact the way that you produce this work, those are far more interesting follow-ups than the original question. So yeah, sure, I think you can do that, but I don't think that you're going to get as valuable responses as you might if you had someone with like some real curiosity or just yes.
I think you might have just like nailed down this product, and we cook up a product today in this lab setup here. But the idea, you're absolutely right. It's about asking the follow-up questions. It's about really like knowing what comes next. Like, okay, here, obviously everybody needs to know like, what is your animating purpose? That's easy. But it is understanding that follow-up. But what I think is interesting about it as a rinse and repeat thing is that if you have this like voice print technologist who's a specialist and somebody with an English degree who's learned all the basics of like, these are the things they teach you in like literature class, right? Character and tone and all that stuff. But if you I found when I give to people who work with me now, I give them my brand narrative. And I say, okay, if you want to figure out, how to work on community management things, et cetera, first feed this into a thread for ChatGPT. Then feed in all the bios of the people in there. Now you can actually start to get some useful information from it. But to make that brand narrative requires somebody who has the wherewithal and the knowledge to ask the follow-up question.
Absolutely. Like you just said, it is a pretty brilliant starting point. But it's not going to give you the end result that you would get with a human being.
Let me ask you for a quick round here. Definition. What is generative AI?
Generative AI is an artificial intelligence tool that helps you create something that you can see or read in real time. So it's not like AI that helps a satellite work, or AI that helps you pick the next song, whatever. Generative AI is you put something in and it gives you something back.
So do you think it's fair to say that it is basically synthetic content, whether it's text, image, video?
Yeah.
audio data, whatever that may be.
Mhm.
So then, if generative AI is synthetic content, what is the right synthetic organic blend? Like nylon and cotton made all of the athleisure industries sing with the Lululemon stretchy
Mhm.
pants and things like that. This is just a philosophical, navel gazing thing, but in the next couple of years, how do you think this is going to change humans? Like
Yeah.
that would be, I mean, it's just
You
fundamental.
know, I think that's a really interesting comparison. I think right now we're sort of figuring out like are we the linen to generative AI polyester, or is generative AI just a really good sewing machine that we're using? Do you know what I mean? Like, are we using this as a tool to create something, or are we creating with it?
Hmm.
And I don't know. I don't know what that's going to end up being. I think right now we're using a really good sewing machine, but I think eventually we might be using it as more of a tool that we work alongside with. And how much we're willing to do that, I think is going to change a lot. Right now, it's got to be over 90% human, 10% AI, and even that feels a little funky to me.
Well, this is about 10% human, my background here, but that's because my writing is 90% human. So, and I'm a writer, not, if I were an actual graphic designer, I would probably feel a little bit less. Although I see people on Midjourney who are putting in like Photoshop filters, and it's like, this is like a creative director at a big Madison Avenue agency. And I'm kind of copying
Yeah.
some of their stuff every now and again.
I've seen these news outlets, right? I think Lifehacker did one where their story was
Yeah.
about ChatGPT, and they have Midjourney doing the header images for it. And I think that's like brilliant, right? Like being able to show the way that it's being used visually it's a great tool to use.
So let me ask you this, a parting question here. These are leaders trying to, figure out how to incorporate or if to incorporate. And probably the first thing they have to do is adopt an AI mindset. What would you, if you were going to advise somebody to, how to adopt an AI mindset, what would you lead with?
Use it for everything, and you'll immediately know what you cannot use it for. So like for instance, when I was doing this, having it do a whole fitness and exercise plan for me, I was like, I actually don't know how to do a squat. And ChatGPT describing to me how to do a squat is not helpful. I need the photo. And Midjourney giving me a photo of how to do a squat is looks insane. So I need something else, right? I immediately was like, oh, this is perfect for a regimen for what to do when I'm there, but how to do
Yeah.
it. And I learned that with using it as a tool for writing, whether or not it's not something I would publish, but it is something that I play with all the time. So use it for recipes, I've used it to draft, don't tell him this, but I have used it to draft texts to my boyfriend to see if he'll notice. Use it for everything. Use it for everything, and you'll figure out what you can't use it for.
That's great. I actually did use it to, I was working on a eulogy and I wanted to just kind of gather some thoughts, and I wrote the whole thing, but I wanted to like kind of clear it up and, winnow it down. And then I looked at it and I was like, no, this is not the right setting for that. Like you do have to figure out like, where's the line drawn, and you just have to do that yourself, I guess, at the end of the day.
For sure. And I think you got to try it with stuff that has nothing to do with the work that you want to use it for, right? Like, figure out if it can write a poem about flowers before you figure out if it can run your business.
True, true. Well, Christiana, thank you so much. I would love to have you back so that we can talk further about. I have so many questions for you, but I don't want to monopolize your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great.